right. So yeah, I've covered a few things here. I think for the time's sake, let's skip over really the details of the access conditions. But what I do want to talk about is why do we make the fair data points and what do they enable us to do in a federated setup? Um, so we've been looking for the past hour at the fair data points a bit already. Miriam showed the one by Meta. Hopefully you can all now set it up with the instructions of Samsung. But I want to dive deep into what is actually on the fair data point that you're going to set up. Now, as Miriam talked you through, the fair data point is basically this big metadata store that gives a lot of information about the data that you are generating and want to share or make available to the world. And you can add all types of metadata about this, such as the themes of the data, when it was published, by whom it was published, who should be cited when somebody reuses that data. And all of that you can kind of see on the right here already, where you've got the language of, in this case, the fair data point, which, I mean, this is Latin, but let's just assume the rest is all in English. You've got the identifiers, when this page was made, etc., etc. Now, the important thing to know about the fair data point is that it follows a very predefined structure, and we're going to need this at a later point in time as well. At the top, we've got the fair data point itself, which is the entry, which is what we're looking at here. That's just the main page of the FTP. And the fair data point then consists of one or more catalogs, which themselves consist of one or more data sets, and each data set is then offered through one or more distributions. And the distributions are the point where we actually get our data, which was the access online button that Miriam, for example, also showed, where she made the connection to the data by Meta, but Miriam sadly wasn't allowed to access it because she doesn't have the rights. Now, this structure that we're looking at here is the structure that every fair data point in the world should follow, at least in broad lines. You can then make some adjustments, but this is the structure that it should follow. Now, all the way at the bottom here, from the distributions, I personally have made the coupling to an Allegro graph server with 4 different repositories, each of which is connected to a distribution. So basically from this distribution, we say, if you want to take a look at my data, you have to go to the Sparkle endpoint of this repository, and there you can access it. That's also what Samsung just showed with the place graph. Here it's Allegro graph, it can be GraphDB, whatever you prefer or like to work with. It doesn't have to be a triple store, it can be anything else, but the triple store is the most machine actionable thing out there, because sending emails to people, it's not really machine actionable. Now, yeah, this is kind of your interface that you get when you make one of these resources. It's a good thing to say, actually. All of these, the fair data point, the catalog, the data set, and the distribution, all of them are called resources. And these resources you can see on the page. It's also nice to know, because these resources, they all have a predefined structure again about what type of data they should have. And you can see, for example, with these stars indicate what information you should or you have to provide in order for it to be usable as a proper resource in a fair data point. Now, if we go to a bit more of a technical step, and I won't show the code because it's a bit complex to hark through, but behind this, there are shackle files. And shackle it's very similar to RDF as well. It's the shapes constraint language, and shackle basically describes how a particular set of data should look like. So in the case of a resource, for example, the shackle file says this resource should have exactly one author. It should have at least one publisher, and it should have at most one license. Very logical things connected to a resource. And you can also play around with the shackle file yourself. I'll share where you can find it on the fair data point later. But you can basically use that to add more metadata if you want. You could, for example, say that you want each resource to have at least one theme attached to it. And that's kind of how you are able to modify and change a fair data point to really make it your own. Now, a bit more on that later, but this is kind of the thing you're looking at where you can define, in this case, a catalog. But of course, a computer doesn't look at these interfaces and graphical UIs, and a computer isn't able to navigate to a fair data point as Miriam did earlier today by just clicking on all the links, because the computer doesn't really know what all of those links are. But the whole idea of a fair data point is to have this machine actionable thing where you enter in one point and you just discover all the data sets that are connected to that fair data point, and they're able to send queries to all those federated triple stores. Now, in order to get there, we need to actually look at the data behind. This is our RDF data. And the beautiful thing, and that's for a little bit more technical people here maybe, if we send a GET request, just any request to the URL of our fair data point, this data that you see on the right here, that is exactly what your computer or your algorithm or your code or whatever is also going to see. And then this means that this is the stuff that we can use to understand what type of data is in the fair data points and know how we can discover the data. But before we really dive into that, there is one layer above it, and Miriam also already showed it, because maybe we do not know the URLs of all the fair data points, and therefore we're not able to get all of this data from all the fair data points. Luckily, the fair data team, the people from Leiden, they have made this home.fairdatapoint.org, which currently has 27 active fair data points on it. I think one of them is DHI Center as well. And when you go to this website, or when your algorithm goes to this website, it can basically get this list of 27 active fair data points and just start sending the queries to all of them, or start investigating all of them to see which of them are interesting and which are maybe less interesting. Now, so let's dive a little bit into the data to show you what that kind of looked like. So here I've got the same data. This is the RDF data behind the fair data point I showed you at the beginning of this presentation. And there's a few things I want to highlight here that are interesting to look at, or that are requirements for our algorithm. Now, first, you can see the very simple metadata coming back here, like the title of the page of the resource, the language in which the resource is written. Could be very important if you don't speak French, for example. But these types of things you can also use to find the theme of this particular resource, or the type of data that is connected underneath it. You saw the themes in the FTP by Meta earlier. You can check all of these in this graph, in this data set, to see, is this actually interesting for my particular use case? And that, of course, can all be done automatically. But all right, next to that, the thing we're interested in is going from this top layer, the fair data point up here, all the way down to all the repositories at the bottom. How do we do that? Well, there's two things I want to point out there. That's at the top here, you can see the URL of our own fair data points. This one's not hosted online, it's local host right now, but it could be dhicenter.com, it could be ftp.lumc.com, whatever. This is just a link to get to this particular fair data point. And if we scroll down and kind of look at all these terms, what we might eventually notice is this one, localhost/catalog at the bottom. And it says it is a direct container. And this direct container indicates that on this page, there is a container which has more resources hidden within it. And the title of this container is catalogs. And if we go back to our page, in the middle there, we can see catalogs. So everything underneath it are all the catalogs on this page, and we should be able to see them there. And indeed, if we look at this term LDP contains, we see another URL. Now, if we follow this URL, which is localhost/catalog/bd and a lot of other characters, and we go to that URL in my browser, we see that we are exactly in the testing catalog, which is the one that's also noted here. Now, with exactly this same idea, you can now go down to your data sets, to your distribution, and go all the way down until you're at the bottom layer of this fair data point that is shown here, the dist1, the dist2, the dist3. And all of this is done automatically by an algorithm, which you can write relatively simply, because all of this data is just easily accessible to everyone. Now, if we're then down at the distribution level, you see this access online and download option we can include. Download, that is something we can talk about in more detail later maybe, but downloading data is not really compliant with the ideas of data visiting. We, of course, prefer to have it all access online, keep the data in your own Drupal store, and only make it available for analysis or reuse at a later point in time. But again, this access online button, you define what's the link to. I don't have that here, but I can quickly show that. You define what the link to your Allegro graph is. And if a computer comes down to this lowest level, they can then find it's gone. But they can find this link to some Allegro graph server where you can then query the data. Now, the beautiful thing about this, and that's where I'm going to stop also because of the time, is that this does not require us to know what type of data there is beforehand. It doesn't require us to know how many data sets there are beforehand, because all of this, from the point of the fair data point index to each of the separate repositories, this all happens in parallel next to each other. And we just index them, we discover them all, and can then decide whether or not we want to use or actually query these data. So yes, I think that is good for now. I'll skip the access control bit, but you can see more about that in the slides and on a video I made about this online where we're going into more detail as well. But thank you for your attention, and I'd love to hear any questions if they are there.